Good afternoon if you're in South Africa, good evening, good morning, depending on which geography you are from. Welcome to the session. I'm really excited to be here. We've got an absolutely fantastic panel of speakers. As Totolo said, my name is Brigitte Da Gama and I'll be the moderator for this session. So I'd like to start by asking each of our panelists to introduce themselves. I'll just give them 2 or 3 minutes and I'll start with you, Andy.
Thank you very much, Brigitte, and thank you to the Global HR Summit platform just to have us as subject matter experts. My name is Andisa Liba. I am the Chief People Officer at Float Pays, and essentially what we do at Float Pays is we work with organizations for them to rethink their compensation models to really reflect the modern workplace that we're trying to foster. We've built a technology that supports that HR agenda and really kind of accelerates it. I'm also a co-founder for an NPO called Women's Tech Connection, which is a digital organization that really drives the, us getting more CCIE engineers across the African continent. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andisa. Gbenga, would you introduce yourself all the way from Nigeria?
It's a pleasure to be here. My sincere appreciation to the entire team that put this together. Excited to be here. My name is Gbenga TOTOYI. I'm the group head of HR for Consolidated All Market Insurance PLC. At the core of our business is, general insurance, but we've got 3 other businesses within the group. We've got a finance house, and health maintenance organization, and a micro insurance firm. What I do here is just provide leadership with regards to how we manage talent. It's been an exciting 3-year period sitting in this role. Our particular industry is very challenged within the financial services space compared to banking or other areas like investment banking. Insurance in Nigeria is still largely behind. But there's been some innovation in recent years, and that has brought some amazing challenge on how you attract, manage, or retain talent. And I'm sure I'll share some personal stories today. Thank you, Bridget.
Thank you so much. And finally, all the way from Chicago, Kacie, please introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you. I'm Kacie Walters. I am in Chicago. It's a lovely day. We're going to maybe touch 26 degrees Celsius, 80 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you in the States. So we're pretty excited about that. I am thrilled to be here. I have over 20 years experience managing learning and development and talent management for startup organizations all the way through large global organizations. And just recently, I departed corporate life, if you will, to start my own business where I help mid-sized companies in culture, learning and engagement, change management, and my personal favorite, manager effectiveness. I am greatly looking forward to the conversation today. I do write a weekly blog actually about these topics that you can find on Substack, and I did publish my first book last year about helping middle managers be successful in the workplace today. So again, greatly looking forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
Thanks, Kacie. Congratulations on publishing your first book. I think that's absolutely amazing. So as I said earlier, my name is Brigitte Da Gama. I'm based in Johannesburg, South Africa. It's a little bit chilly. It's winter in the Southern Hemisphere. I work as a fractional HR executive, and I know there are people out there saying like, what is that? So in the new world of work, there's a prediction that we'll have fractional jobs, and I'm actually in that fractional job. So I work for a couple of organizations as the HR executive on a fractional basis. It's actually one of the trends emerging, and it's absolutely fascinating to be in this space. I'm also the founder of Takeaway Consulting. And over and above that, I teach as well at the University of Witwatersrand's Business School. And I believe in volunteering because I believe in living in balance in this world, and sometimes you have to give back. So I volunteer as part of the BRICS organization. They have a unit called the BRICS Business Council. Each of the BRICS countries has one. And one of the subcommittees of that council works as the Skills Development Working Group. So we're looking at future skills, particularly for the youth in each of the BRICS countries. And that's how I volunteer in order to build future skills that our economy will require. And it's very exciting. First, I get to develop and grow youth, and also I get to make a contribution. Thank you for being here. We are here to look at managing talent in global and digital workplaces. And I can say that this topic it's never been as relevant as it is today, with so many things in transition and so many things shifting. So without further delay, I'd like to ask each of our panelists just to share with us what they think are the trends emerging in the talent management space as we speak. And they are emerging very rapidly, I think. I'll start again with you, Andy.
Sure. Thank you for that question, Brigitte. I mean, I think we're seeing, kind of, like the curve just around, the integration of AI and machine learning, particularly in the area of HR. I think in other industries, the last 10 plus years, probably even before then, I speak through the lens of Africa. Technology has been a big driver, and I think suppose the opportunity where talent management is concerned is that it's helping us as HR professionals kind of really streamline the more mundane, repetitive tasks. That one can help us to reduce human errors. Two, I think give us space for us to think more innovatively, and I think kind of exist in this world where we really can add value from a strategic perspective. And so what I am enjoying, I think, is the evolution of, I think, some of these large enterprise HR tools that are allowing us to, I think, integrate and kind of have a central repository for data in terms of how do we manage talent and all the data management around the talent management ecosystem that helps us to track where people are in the employee life cycle. It helps us to have, I think, conversations that are more robust, that come from a more data-driven space, and inadvertently that allows us to kind of get rid of the bias, which I think for the longest time it's always been the thing we struggle with as HR professionals as we engage with businesses, just around managing that that talent ecosystem. So for me, if anything else, I'm seeing, I think some of these trends coming up, and there's a lot of these platforms. I won't mention too many names. But there's definitely an opportunity there, I think, for us to accelerate our work and for us to position ourselves as more strategic business partners, rather than people who are the police and the custody, managers of mundane HR tasks.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely true. What are your views, Gbenga? You're on mute.
Thanks a lot. I couldn't agree more with Andy. Incidentally, earlier today, I'll be honest, I drafted a job profile for someone that was moving into another role within the organization, and I thought I'd done a good job. But I just thought, you know what, I don't have a lot of time on my hands, and I really just want to just check on my grammar and all of that. And I just threw that into, I recently signed up for the OpenAI platform, and I just threw it in, corrected my English, I took it back, and then I asked another unit head in the organization to take a look. And I had some sense of assurance in my head that I'm certain there's no error in grammar on what I just sent out, right? And that's how real technology and how in sync technology has been to the world of work, and we're just going to see that going on and on. But I would like to refer to, I think, 2 or 3 other things that I see that is really beginning to gain ground from this part of the country, and I also see it happening in the continent and across the world. One is the issue of diversity is going to continue to gain more and more attention. If anything, increased number of Africans are migrating to other parts of the world. And so I'm sure Kacie all of a sudden see more Africans all around her in the US and all of that. And I honestly believe that even within the African continent, the Africa Free Trade Zone conversation is big, but I think we're going to begin to see, I predict that 2 years from now, mobility of talent, even within the African continent, will be more and more of an issue. I mean, just yesterday, for instance, one of our biggest names in Africa, Dangote, commissioned this big refinery, and 5 presidents from the region had to be in attendance, right? 40% of the production that will come from that refinery will be feeding into neighboring African countries. What that means, even by shares, by the fact that of where it's located, they cannot but work with other Africans that are closer to that part of the Nigerian. So diversity is going to be a big issue from a talent mobility standpoint, and it's going to make the world a truly global place. And so from an HR standpoint, we need to begin to talk about helping people truly understand other people's culture and how to manage people from different backgrounds, from a culture standpoint and ethnicity standpoint, and I dare say even religious standpoint. Those things are going to be big conversations when we talk about talent across the world. And for me, the last thing is, and we're already seeing that in my part of the world, compensation is going to become so disrupted. You're going to have 50 people working in the organization. If you're not careful, you will have 50 different payment, compensation plans, because you're competing for talent at different levels, and you will have to be a lot more innovative in how you are drafting compensation plans. It's going to be a big issue. I'm already dealing with that, and I see it growing.
Great. Kacie, what are your views?
Yeah, that was a really interesting comment, Gbenga, about global mobility. That has always been at the forefront, as well as helping people, understand different cultures and different backgrounds, and just diversity and inclusion in general, which I think is getting a lot of attention today, as well as how do we diversify our workforces. We know that teams are stronger with different perspectives, be it age, be it race, be it gender, be it geographic region. And so I do think that is at the top of agendas today from a leadership perspective. I also see, though, and we're kind of talking about this, and Brigitte, you alluded to fractional employees and the like. I think from a talent management perspective, we're getting more creative, for sure. I think we have to attract different talent. And therefore, I am seeing a huge shift to skills. So it's less about roles and jobs, and it's more about skills and experiences. And I know we're going to maybe talk about degrees and certifications and the like to demonstrate those skills. But I think from an attraction standpoint and a development standpoint, I'm seeing a lot more focus on what is the job, what are the tasks associated with those jobs, and therefore, what are the skills and experiences, and maybe education. I know, Gbenga, you talked about writing a job description and the like, and I'm seeing more around success profiles. So again, less about the traditional job description and more about, what is the work and what is it going to take for someone to be successful in that role, which is where I think we've always kind of had a toe, if you will, in that water. But I certainly see us more and more moving towards skills frameworks. And, Andisa, to your point about technology platforms, certainly those are trying to get ahead of that as well, and embedding skills frameworks within those platforms as well. I do think compensation is an interesting comment. I'm also seeing a shift kind of tied to compensation, but in the performance management space as well. I know so many organizations, however, who still do annual reviews, the dreaded annual performance review, but I think we're moving more and more toward frequent conversations, fluid goals based upon the direction of the organization, the needs of the job. And I think that's good as well. And it makes the need for that manager to be really important as well. But there are so many shifts going on, Brigitte. I think it'd probably take us the whole time, right, to articulate all of those. But I think these are very fair statements. But I certainly see us getting way more creative in creating pipelines of talent and trying to keep our talent engaged and give them opportunities for growth and development as well.
Yeah. I I think each of you answered in a way there was such richness in what you were sharing with us. For me, I think we're going to be seeing less and less hierarchical organizations, a lot less command and control designed organizations. I think we're going to be working in obviously a lot more cross-functional ways. Understanding the beauty, Gbenga, of diversity and how performance increases when you have diversity, not only from a race and gender perspective, but also, when you involve different functional areas, you get those different perspectives that will lead teams to perform at a higher level. And I think that's particularly important. Leadership is going to be interesting. I think, when I know, Kacie, you'll be sharing some of your amazing insights later as well on this topic, but I think that it's going to be a more human type of leadership. I think it's gonna need to be a lot more empathetic, a lot more adaptable in this new world of work that we are going into. So very, very interesting trends emerging in the space. And whenever I speak to HR practitioners, I always say it's going to feel quite intense. It's going to feel like a lot, but it is so exciting. And whenever you have these dramatic shifts taking place, it's also an opportunity for us to influence, to build something better, to build a future workplace that is much more amazing. So we shouldn't be uncomfortable with the changes. We should actually be embracing it and leading the conversations in our organizations around these changes. Thank you for that. So Andy, I'll ask you, what impact do you think that the future world of work will have on attracting and managing talent in the workplace?
Gosh, I think a great deal. And I think to echo the sentiments of my panelists, I think the global geographical walls have completely collapsed. I think that's one. I think COVID has kind of accelerated a lot of what we're seeing now in terms of our potential to hire from other geographies. So now all of a sudden I've got options to either hire out of Krakow, right? Or in other areas where, geographically they're kind of in the same time zone as me in terms of acquiring skills. And so I think there's so much opportunity right now for us to recalibrate around really, the type of skills that we want in our organization. Again, to my other panelists, sentiment, less about the actual, traditional roles. How do we then grow the business and how do we acquire those skill sets? And I really think technology is a big part of that it's allowing us, I think, to have multiple touch points without needing to have the physical presence. So the fact that right now you've got a panel of 4 people, in 3 different geographies, that in itself tells you the story, right? Just in terms of where we're going. So if you take that and synthesize it into what we need for the modern workplace, it all of a sudden, I think, gives us a lot more allowances. Granted, I think we're always going to have legislative, issues around tax and the complexity of that. But at a baseline level, I think our ability to, get talent from other regions, the cross-pollination, and I think the skills transfer, between, different geographies and the learnings we can acquire for that. So those of us who are in Africa, what we can learn from our counterparts in other parts of the world. And I definitely think vice versa. I think there's a lot of innovation that's coming out of Africa. I think Africa as a continent is a very exciting continent right now. Lots of innovation by Africans, for Africans, that are being exported to other parts of the world. And I think to your point, Brigitte, there really is just so many opportunities. I think if we embrace the change, and just that transformation, despite it might feel a little overwhelming, but there's so many opportunities for us to recalibrate and I think to position ourselves as, I think, one, HR function, I think B, just how humans now, redefine what work is. I really think the opportunity is really super exciting.
Yeah, I have to agree. And, I would just share with you very, very briefly that I actually personally know several people who are based in Johannesburg and work for American companies, US companies. The sleep cycles are slightly different because
Sure.
of the time difference, but they make it work and they enjoy it. So there you go. Gbenga.
The exchange rate makes it interesting.
Yes.
Certainly.
Some researchers believe, Gbenga, that in the future world of work, organizations will hire for potential as opposed to hiring for qualifications and experience. Do you believe that this is a good approach?
Totally. I mean, let me just, right on what Kacie had mentioned earlier. So the truth is that we're being forced into it. And I know a few HR folks may not want to agree. And I'll give you a scenario in my part of the world. This is actually the first time since, I think, 2004, 2005, when we had the banking consolidation, that we had such a drive at entry-level recruitment. We had such a massive pull at entry-level recruitment across organizations, particularly banking. This is the first since last year, 2 years thereabout, that we are having a return of such attention given to entry-level recruitment in Nigeria, right? And then if I look away from graduate level roles and I look up above in the organization, when we had such pull or exit of mid-level, even to senior roles, you now have a situation where some organizations that would have typically just looked at degrees and insisted on a certain, grade band, or else they won't hire you. In some industries here, some organizations even narrowed down to specific universities. It was that bad. And said, if you're not from these universities, at entry level, you're just not going to get into the organization. Kudos to them, though. Data supported that practice, because looking at entry level roles and looking at performance of existing employees in the organization, and I dare say some of the founders or senior executives in the organizations had ties to 1, 2, 3 of such universities. And so data supported it, right? And it supported some sort of alumni engagement, some sort of even CSR activities with those universities. But we came into a period where all of that got disrupted, right? And then, like Kacie said earlier, we started getting forced to look down and say, okay, what for this particular role, what skill sets are we looking for? And can't we train for it? Can't this particular individual be supported by this huge investment in technology? And so in the last 2 years in Nigeria, particularly the financial services sector, all that got disrupted, and it's amazing to see, right? And if I use my organization as an example, I came on this role, and like I said earlier, the insurance subsector is a bit challenged in the sense that it's a very technical industry. And so you have very old, experienced hands in the market. At some level, the market is not also very innovative and attractive to young talents. They would rather go to the investment banking arm and go to the fintechs like Andy. I hope you've not hired some Nigerians, eh? And so I looked at it and I felt, you know what, I'm not going to fight because I came into an organization that to an extent was credited with being like the arsenal of the industry. We have history of attracting and developing young talents and have gone on to do great things. I just said, you know what, I'm just going to focus on this. And this year, we are now going to have our entry-level graduate programs running twice in a year. This was something that we sort of like stopped at some point, but I had to go back there in a bid for me to survive the competition in the market and also begin to change the culture and change a few things and bring innovation. And so I look back today, 3 years on, I've got younger employees all through the business. We brought in a mentorship program that sort of brought some energy into the organization. And all around the business today, there's potential, but that is working, right? So we got forced into it with competition, and I'm loving it. I'm loving it. So it works, and I think it's going to continue for a long time.
Thanks for sharing that case study, Gbenga, from Nigeria. Kacie, what sort of trends are you seeing with the question around skills, potential versus qualifications and experience in the US?
Yeah, it is an interesting question. And I think I know, Gbenga, you talked about hiring more entry-level people. And I think, in that respect, certainly potential has a lot to do with it. I think I'm not, to be honest, I'm not seeing the focus on potential, unfortunately, as much in more mid-level roles, because I think that is where we should go. But I do think when we shift to more skills and experiences, that's where we can really create great career paths, because now that's kind of the common language, if you will, to say, well, how do I get from customer service to sales, or from, accounting into finance, or, I do think those are the sorts of things we need to start to enable a little bit better. And not that they're going to be clear-cut paths. I've never agreed in having such regimented career paths. But I think if we can really hone in on skills, experiences, and sometimes I have articulated attitudes as well. Sometimes that matters, to a role. But if we can articulate these things, then it provides great career paths for people to see how they could move across the organization. And I will say internal mobility should be very important to companies. And I do think it is, because it is hard to attract talent in certain areas. I know, Gbenga, you were saying, younger employees may not be attracted to the insurance industry. I've been in financial services for a long time, and the same is true there. Not everybody wants to go work for a bank. They want to go work for Google or Facebook or Meta, pardon me. But how do you attract those people? And it is through, providing them, to your point, rotational programs, mentoring programs. I think those are the things that those companies can do. I think where the potential does come in, that I have seen a lot and have architected some things around, is really looking in terms of succession planning and understanding who maybe your next layer of leaders are, and what sorts of, again, skills, experiences, but potential do they have, to be kind of your next layer of leadership. And then, but we try to have better criteria around that than just potential. So, we have, at Northern Trust anyway, I articulated we had some pretty stiff criteria articulated so that we could be fair and equitable, about who we selected to be at that next layer of leadership. But I would like to see potential more at the forefront, like I said, in more mid-level roles, and hopefully we'll get there. But I do see that certainly on the entry level path that Gbenga mentioned, because, they may have some experience with internships and the like, but they may not have, more than a couple of years experience out of school potentially. But yeah, I'd love to see it more, but I think as we shift to skills and experience and less about necessarily years in a job, or, you did the same exact job that we want to hire you to do. I think we do need to get away from that a bit and get more creative to find good fits and diverse perspectives as well within different roles.
Absolutely.
Brigitte, if I can just add on that, I think to Casey's point, and certainly what I've seen in my organization and the pivot is when we did an organizational, restructure a couple of months ago, right? And, we had a look at, a couple of the functions. What subsequently happened in the last year is that you actually now have 3 C-suite executives also doubling down and wearing the hat of sales directors. So despite the fact that I'm a chief people officer, actually all of the enterprise client deals the last year I've been responsible for. Never in a million years did I think I was capable of doing sales or I would ever be in a sales role. Neither has my head of capital markets, and he's a traditional banker at heart. Neither has my head of marketing, and perhaps I think she's a little closer, to that sales touch point. But I do definitely, think that there is a shift. I don't think it's happening as rapidly at a mid and I think at a C-suite level. But again, I think this is where we have the opportunity to recalibrate around, what skill sets are in the organization, who's good at what, right? Are they best placed, and how do we then marry their OKRs to the things that they're good at? And so if I look at the evolution of my own role, so sure, on paper, I'm chief people officer, and a large part of my days are spent doing, human capital tasks. But, I've got a journalism background. So all the articles that you see out on Float Page, I typically write those out. All of the, the media interview, all of that stuff. And so that for us, is kind of testament to, if you structure tasks around what people are good at, you're likely to create, I think, a set and an environment where they can constantly do the things that they enjoy, rather than to do things because they're on a tick box and because there is a JD that, that needs to be met. And so, a lot of our OKRs, and they're just really just around things that you're good at. And then that's how we measure and track success. So it's not so much, and I suppose we do need to make that deviation from, our definition of what success is, right? Success in the workplace isn't necessarily working hard. It's about outcomes. So how do we get to create environments that are outcome based, but also speak to, I think, what people are really super good at, and kind of really reaching that sweet spot. It is achievable. I know it's difficult because, it requires us to really rethink a lot of things and kind of throw out, the entire operating model. And I suppose that's where the discomfort is, right? Is, this entire operating model that has served us well for the past 50, 100 years is no longer fit for purpose if we're having these progressive conversations around the modern workplace.
Yeah.
Amazing. I've got to jump in on that, Bridget. Forgive me. I've got to jump in because
jump.
It's exciting for me to see. And I mean, kudos to all people managers on this call. I think we all need to give ourselves some credit. We got pushed into it, and I've seen a lot more adaptation that we give ourselves credit for, right? In my case, under a year that I joined the organization and they saw the way I was challenging what was going on in technology, or the CTO found it easier to push things through me. What happened a year after? I was made chairperson for the board committee on technology. And while I still sat in HR, a few months after that time as well, I'm the one always critiquing what goes out on social media. I'm the one liking and sharing and all of that. And I'm sure at some point, the guys who run our digital channels and all of that started drawing me into conversations and, oh, let's do this and let's do that. And I think I got my highest commendation from the group and managing director when he had a visitor once and he was trying to introduce me. I said, well, he sits in our HR, but I'll be honest, I think he's a core member of our strategy team, right? That is one thing that has made my work very exciting in the 3 years that I've been here. And we are seeing that replicated more and more, even beyond my organization. I know a few friends in other organizations who it's just a sheer scope of work. I mean, I've got one of them on this call. He just said hi to me, Wale. He left one organization for another in the same role, literally, but the scope of work is just a lot more. And I see him now teaching and passing on knowledge and all of that, compared to a role where he was largely sedentary at some point. My point is, we're seeing more and more of this happening in my part of the world. I hear testimonials from friends from outside of Nigeria as well, and I don't see it stopping. It's just going to continue more and more as we delve into this new world that is not so futuristic anymore.
Yeah, I think both you and Andisa are describing something very exciting. The ability to be adaptable, the willingness to go into a new space, the courage to take on a new role to some extent, and to learn, obviously, in order to execute it well. And that is an exciting part of the future. I will make one observation on this particular topic, and that is, I think in a world where we recruit for potential as opposed to the old-fashioned way where you look at only experience and qualification, in that world, we have a better chance of having equality, especially around gender, because research has found that men are more likely to be promoted or hired for potential than women. So if you can just have a kind of environment where, everybody's looked at for potential, I think you'll have more equality as well. Thank you. That was very exciting, I must say. There seems to be a trend where companies are dropping the requirement for university college degrees. Do you think this will be short-lived, or do you think it is here to stay? I think I'd like Kacie to comment on that. The Americans seem to be leading the way.
Yes, yes, I do not think it's a short-term shift whatsoever. I think, unfortunately, in the United States, the cost of higher education is astronomical, to be honest. And so we have a number of people coming out of high school, moving into college, taking on enormous debt to get a 4-year degree. Maybe that will change. There are some universities who are actually getting very creative about that and providing different types of programming. So not necessarily degrees, but things that might stack to a degree, but that give some level of certification to demonstrate certain skills that would be very desirable to companies. So definitely universities are getting creative in that regard and working more with companies in the United States and co-creating programs together, which I think is the right direction for sure. And I think, students are coming to organizations with this enormous debt. Companies and leadership are realizing, wow, that's a big burden for our employees to now carry. And so some companies are helping students with their debt. Some companies provide tuition assistance for those who want to go back to school, be it, undergraduate or graduate level. But I think from a requirement standpoint, again, if we go back and focus on the roles, the job, the tasks that need to be done, and the skills that need to do it, I think organizations are realizing, you might not need a 4-year degree in order to do this job. Other jobs, however, certainly. I mean, I think, clearly if you need to be, if you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, even an accountant, right, you need some level of training. And so, but for some of these entry level roles, I think we're determining that a 4-year degree may not be required. And I contend that university may not be for everyone either. We've, at least the United States, that's kind of the path or the desired path or the path that's presented to you. I don't think university is for everybody. I think that takes a different level of self-discipline. There can be biases within that process for sure, and access to opportunities vary quite a bit based on where you live and the like. So I think, to your point about equity and access to opportunities and level playing fields as well, I think organizations are greatly seeing that perhaps a 4-year degree may not be necessary for certain jobs. And then as an opportunity to grow their employees, if they would like to pursue that after they've joined the company, perhaps there's something that they've co-created with the university that really is tailored to that company and also builds those skills. Or they can invest in their development by giving back to them, by helping them get that degree, while they're working for the organization. That to me seems to be more of the trend, along with other organizations that are just providing certificates. So if you want to understand, if you want to be a .NET programmer, maybe you don't need a 4-year computer science degree, right? Maybe you just need a certification and some experience to actually program in the .NET framework. I think that trend is only going to grow, in my opinion.
I think I concur with you, definitely. I see that a number of large organizations, IBM, are definitely going in that direction.
Yes, yes. They've led the way.
Yeah, a number of them going that way.
Yes.
Andy, what are the pros and cons of the hybrid workplace, especially with regards to how we manage our people and our talent in the hybrid workplace?
So this is always a difficult one for me, because I work for an organization that is fully remote. We made the choice to move away from traditional real estate. And my organization's is a bit of a half and half, right? So you've got a lot of mid-career hires who I think, who have families, so we enjoy the flexibility. I love being able to make the school run and pancakes and, and all the wonderful things that add value to, to my family. And of course, I think, you've got the younger ones who did not have the benefit of the socialization, right? So they didn't assimilate into the workplace in the fashion that we did. But I also question that fashion because that fashion was also coming from a place of command and control. If we're really being honest, I started working 20 plus years ago. And so when I came in as an intern, my experience was fundamentally different to, I think, my younger interns coming in. And I think we've got to be careful around, I think, how we manage different subsets of talent, in particularly, I think, in the hybrid world. I think different people need different things. I think the one size fits all approach is no longer working. It's now one size fits one, which is one subset. So I think, the younger ones in terms of the expectation and I guess how we curate the workplace, because this is essentially what they're going to walk out of from our organizations into the broader world, right? They didn't have the benefit of being, conditioned in a certain way. So for me, I think there is an opportunity in understanding, I think, specific needs for each subset of employees and trying to curate experiences and ways of working that work for them. Not all of them are, bright and early in the morning and they want to do an 8 o'clock meeting, right? So, does it make sense to have an 8 o'clock huddle? For us parents at 8 o'clock, our kids are already at school. I'm ready to hit the ground running at 8 a.m. I can have a huddle easily. But, my younger colleagues are less than thrilled, I think, to be invited to an 8 a.m. huddle. So, so it is a delicate line, I think, of moving away, yes, from command and control, but I think curating experiences and finding a middle ground. And part of that involves a lot of compromise. And I know, I think, our older leaders have a difficult time with that because, their style of leadership also came with power and control. And in this virtual world, you kind of really lose that, right? I mean, unless you're going to be micromanaging people, in the absence of that, it requires us to give a lot more autonomy. So I think autonomy is the order of the day. How do we create enough autonomy while we're still managing tasks, not the individual? Because again, the definition of success has not changed. COVID has forced us to look particularly at outcomes, not bums on seats that you're online at 8 a.m. and you're logging off at exactly 5 p.m., right? So, what we're measuring now in terms of success is really outputs. So whether someone works 6 days or 6.5 days today, or 5 days, 5 hours, the next day, it's neither here or there. So I think if anything else, it's again speaking to diversity, and I think our ability to relax the rules a little. I'm always conscious of the moms, that are on my team. Try not to set up meetings around times. I know they're doing school pickups. It's counterproductive. It frustrates them. I don't get the best out of them. So it really is about, just finding compromise and finding ways where we can better collaborate together. And I think the reality is that there's no silver bullet. I mean, I think each division, each functional vertical, has its different needs, right? I mean, I know our finance team, when it's month end, they're working 8, 9, 10-hour days. But, that's kind of that world. Does that make sense to shift that style of work to the marketing team, right? Who often have events later on in the evenings and do all sorts of things. So it really is about finding flexibility, but curating experiences for each subsets. Whether by function, whether by where the people are generationally, are they Gen X, Z, Y, and everything in between, what makes sense to collaborate together. And a lot of it is really just compromise.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Gbenga, I think in a number of countries across the world, they are busy testing the 4-day work week. I know New Zealand is testing it. South Africa is busy doing it at the moment.
Okay.
The UK has done it in a number of countries. What is the situation in Nigeria, and what are your views on the 4-day work week?
To be honest,
even what Andy was saying about outcomes.
okay. Again, it's one of those things that, a few people have in Nigeria have tried to capture the reality, but I think we've been bold to try it, particularly in service-based companies. and it has worked. I will refer to what Andy mentioned earlier about trying different models. For my current company, we do hybrid work, and there is no one style or one policy for everyone. We totally left it to line managers to decide on what works within the team. I will just hold the line manager responsible for outcomes, right? Where we see a challenge, though, is in the productive end of the economy. Oil and gas, productive companies will still have to run lines and all of that. So the traditional shifts and all of that is still what works there. But for large service firms, sales-oriented firms, tech companies, digital companies, educational facilities, hospitals, all of those areas have warmed up to the idea of hybrid work. I don't think another area where we have a huge challenge is public sector. The public sector workforce is huge in Nigeria, and I think in some parts of Africa as well. I don't know what happens in America. Maybe Kacie can refer to that. Still a challenge because the bigger problem is infrastructure, right? Not all homes can be worked from, right? And it's only a few organizations that are, like we said earlier, looking at compensation even from a standpoint of, I expect you to work from home, and I'm going to provide the infrastructure and tools to make it easier for you to work from home. Some just say, hey, work from home, without giving the tools to make it work, i.e. jobs, power, alternative power arrangements and things like that, to make it work, right? So you then call the employee that's supposed to be working from home on that day, and he or she tells you, I don't have power. You can't then blame that person, right? Or internet supply. Those two big areas are still a little bit of a challenge. So we've not seen some countrywide or industry-wide adoption of the 4-day work week, but the idea of hybrid work or completely remote work has come to stay in Nigeria. Public sector, productive end of the economy is where we still have some challenges, and we'll see what happens in the years ahead.
Yeah, I do know from some of the countries that were ahead of us in terms of testing the 4-day work week that actually a lot of them did not see a reduction in productivity, which is, I think, a very, very interesting trend. And then
I don't think we are capturing, sorry, Brigitte, I don't think we are capturing this line properly from a research standpoint, because business leaders are saying, I don't have a problem letting you work from, I don't have a problem you being completely remote. We had a big challenge with a expected change in behavior. I mean, I'll be honest, some people took work from home to be don't work at home, right? They took it as holidays, right? And then we had situations, I mean, we had some funny incidences in this part of the world where, and I'm sure some Nigerians here can refer to it. There was some, what's the word now? Some riots in town, and some worker that was supposed to be working from home decided to go join the protest, right? And he carried a placard, and the poor guy took a picture and came on LinkedIn and posted it. On the day he was supposed to be working from home, I can see you guys shaking your head, right? And then the line manager took, I think it was line manager or HR, took him on to say, hey, dude, you're supposed to be working from home. And this guy had a big fight. Okay, I remember the story very well. He came back online to say, hey, his fundamental human rights was being infringed upon. How come his HR line manager is not allowing him to go protest for the protection of his rights? And we're like, hey, wait a minute, he was supposed to be working from home on that day. So we've had a big shift regarding the change in behavior and all of that, but we have not captured real data that support the change in productivity, change in company revenue lines. And that's why a few traditional leaders will still be a bit hesitant to support going full-blown or doing a bit more, because we've not captured the data to support increase in productivity or show areas where we may have a few gaps and we need to deploy some interventions. I just thought to throw that in.
Yeah, I actually know somebody who's on that committee in South Africa, looking at the 4-day work week over here. And they definitely are looking at those metrics very, very carefully. As soon as it's done, I'll put you in touch so that you can actually get the data from them.
Bridget, I wonder if I can just jump into what Gbenga
I can
was
just
saying.
make one comment before you go, Andy. But
Sure.
Gbenga, you made an interesting observation. In a world where many of us have the opportunity to work in a hybrid way, and we appreciate the flexibility around that, we must always just remember frontline workers. It's a little bit harder for them. They don't have that opportunity very easily. Andy, over to you.
Thanks, Bridget. I mean, I just wanted to say, just to add to Gbenga's comments and certainly yours, is I think we often forget. I think now we're in this space and evolution of, like reframing the construct of the workplace. We forget that, because we had the traditional in-office experience, did not necessarily equate to full productivity for that whole 8 hours. Yeah. And I think the reason why the 4-day week works, or even hybrid, is because of that. I no longer have the benefit or the privilege of the water cooler conversations. I'm at my desk. I will grab my lunch, and sure, there are days I will move away and sit in the garden, etc., etc. And so that very construct, and I think it's been so misinterpreted that, when bums on seats and people are physically, at a location, that they're fully productive for that whole 8 hours, when in actuality, that isn't necessarily the case. I think the average employee on average probably works in office for 6 hours. So between lunch breaks, walking to meetings, and, changing locations for whatever reason, tea breaks and everything else in between, really what you're getting out of them is probably a solid 5.5, 6 hours. And so I think, our disassociation with the construct of what work is and what productivity means in a day when people are in location is actually quite flawed.
Yes. We're so excited to have you all listening to this conversation. Please put your questions in the chat box, and we will definitely get to it in the last 15 minutes. We'd love to answer some of your questions. Kacie, it has been argued that in companies with remote working, the line manager is sometimes the main point of contact for employees. In a Deloitte survey, 60% of remote and hybrid employees said that their manager was now the most influential person that they interacted with in terms of staying in touch with the company culture. What kind of skills should we develop in managers in this type of scenario?
Great question. And I did read that study. And there's been other studies about managers being more influential over employees' lives than, say, their spouse or their therapist or, their pastor, whoever's in their lives. Just piggybacking off what, Andisa and Gbenga had said, the role of the manager has changed because of the way that work is changing. So I would love to go to a 4-day work week, by the way. I don't know if the US will adopt that or not. We don't even like to take vacation in this country, which is just crazy. So we have to beg people to go on vacation. It's crazy. But I think, in the old way, if you were, back in the office, I think employees who were busy doing work, to your point, are more productive being remote because there aren't the distractions. The role of the manager might have been a bit different, though. If they are the ones, their role was checking in on employees and going to meetings maybe. And so when they were sent home, if you will, back in early 2020, late 2019, their role changed. They were not walking among the staff anymore. They weren't maybe necessarily checking in on the staff as much as they could if they were, 2 cubicles away from them. And so the connection between the employee and the manager has become more critical. And there are things that both sides can do actually to be effective in a hybrid environment. I'm sure most of you, as well as me, I mean, I've managed global teams for decades. So there were times where I've never met a team member in person. So we had to figure out how to work remotely even before COVID hit. But COVID certainly had a huge impact, especially on the US with a lot of offices. But the manager's role has shifted from being, necessarily the managing execution, managing work and tasks, although that's certainly part of the job, and more about that being that coach, that communicator, that connector. Their role is critical to keeping the team engaged. And we also talked a lot about personalization, and I heard that, through our conversation today. The manager needs to be able to listen and ask questions of every employee and understand what matters to them. To your point, are you a mother and you're just not available at 7 a.m. or 3 p.m. in the afternoon because of kids situations? And you have to tailor the work and the experiences to that person. So the manager needs to take more time to work with their employees. They need to have more intentional time to engage. And it can be half an hour a week, but I recommend weekly check-ins. I recommend checking in every week. I am still surprised when I learn that, unfortunately, some employees at previous companies have told me, I talk to my manager maybe like once a quarter. That's just like, oh my goodness. Or I've never talked to my manager and I've been here 4 months. It pains me when I hear those types of comments, because I think managers must check in every week. And then maybe one of those check-ins every month need to be about someone's career and growth and development opportunities. So it can't just be about the work. I think, I've never liked the term work-life balance. And I think it's even more relevant today, right? Because life is life and work is part of life and personal and family is part of life. And so, but just understanding and working with each employee to figure out the plan that's best for them, that meets the outcomes of the team, their work environment needs, their personal needs, their growth and career desire needs. All of that is kind of on the back of a manager, I would say, which is why before someone is promoted to being a manager, we need to set very clear expectations of what is that role and what does that require. And then we can help you, again, through identifying the skills to be successful. We can help you grow and develop into that role. But I think oftentimes we promote people because they're, the star accountant or the star salesperson. So let's promote them to lead the team. Very different role, very different skills. And I think we just need to be more transparent about what that role entails so that people can either actively choose or actively not choose, which is okay, by the way, that they do or don't want to be a manager. This role has become even more critical today, Brigitte. And I think it should take a lot of our learning and development teams' times, I think, to support and develop people in these roles.
Yeah, I've heard it said that these middle managers often feel like the ham in the sandwich,
Yes. They're either squeezed or they're pulled, and they've got to take care of themselves, right? I mean, if they don't take care of themselves, then the whole system falls apart, quite frankly. Agreed.
Yeah. What are your observations, Andisa, on these middle management roles, especially in a company like yours that has gone fully remote?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think my CEO and I had to be very clear on the evolution and of the role, and I think our expectations for those who have been entrusted with the custodianship of looking after others is that your fundamental role is that you are the developer of human potential. So your engagements with the team need to be anchored around that. So sure, there's technical aspects that you have to check the boxes and dot the I's and cross the T's, and that's a very small part of it. But really, how do you engage with your team? And I think to Kacie's comments, right? We highly encourage weekly check-ins. So everyone across our organization has a weekly 30-minute check-in every week. That is absolutely mandatory. We've got, like once a week, team meetings where we just check in with each other's, we will update each other on our OKRs by department, bi-weekly we'll have, functional huddles and all of these things. But really, that responsibility has become that much more particularly in a fully remote, environment, as much as we do. Once a month, we, by city, we will have drinks or breakfast meetings. We do that by city. Once a quarter, we will do that, as a collective. So either we in Johannesburg fly to Cape Town and vice versa. And so this sort of work requires a lot of intention. And I think for the longest time, what we were able to do in the office is just kind of scoot on by, because you could always walk past someone's desk, right? You could always have that anecdotal conversation as you getting your coffee, right? You hear them talking, you can kind of get a sense of where people are with their task, how are they feeling, et cetera, in the canteen. And, so there was all of those anecdotes that are no longer there. And where we are now is to really create spaces where we are intentional about asking people, how are you? Hey, how are your kids? Hey, you said your kid is in music. How's it going with his piano lessons? All of those things, before I could just simply hear them at an earshot from my office if I had people sitting in an open plan right outside my door, and I didn't need to ask that. Whereas now I actually have to set aside the time and actually have to make a mental note of, intentionally checking in. And usually my weekly check-ins actually have got nothing to do with work. It's literally, Brigitte, hey, how are you? Hey, you traveled last week. Hey, I saw like an interesting LinkedIn post. I'd love to hear more about it. Where did I come from? And you start, building, I think, relational, capital in a very intentional way than I think, we the privilege we had and we really took for granted that, we all existed in a vacuum in a building where you can just anecdotally hear stuff. And so for us, we've also made it equally clear and I think fair. In fact, we had one team member who said, I'm actually not good at people management stuff. Like, I'm an introvert. I've got my own issues. I can do technically my job and I can deliver it. But if my doing that is hinged on me managing others, I actually don't want the role. And again, that forced us to have a very different conversation about what do we really need from this role, right? Could we lift and drop those team members to someone else in the team who has capacity and who has built that muscle and support this individual, right? If they have the appetite, or should they choose to lean in to managing people, and carve out a pathway of learning for them to acquire those skills. And when they are ready, right, lift and drop again, the functional, units back to them. But it's not the sort of risk, at least in our business, we're willing to take. So, we're quite transparent in having those kinds of conversations around who's ready, why they're not ready, what can we do to capacitate them to be ready. And as we speak, we're on a journey with one person who said, absolutely not. I'm good at my job. I'm just not good at managing people. I don't know how to speak to people. It just gets me super anxious. I can't do this. And that was perfectly fine. And so again, I think it speaks to what I alluded to earlier, just around personalization and, and moving away from that one size fits one, that, there's one, profile of a leader, right? Like in our business, there's multiple profiles of leaders and it's worked. It hasn't, affected our commercials, it hasn't affected our culture, but we've been very agile. And I think we're very, willing to pivot in and out of different mental models that we've become accustomed to embracing new ones. And I think whilst we do that, then being very careful around how do we create the scaffoldings, in that process of building, because that's essentially, where that is, right? You're in the process of building. And in part of that, in managing your risk, you've got to put up the scaffolding, to support people and help them feel safe until, you can kind of get them to a place where they need to be. And if they never get there, to make peace with it.
Yeah, definitely. Let's spend a minute talking about the younger talent entering the workplace. Some interesting trends coming out in that space. So, Gbenga, Gen Z are now entering the workplace and they have less developed social skills. Yeah. Some of these people are showing they were finishing school with a global pandemic. They were isolated. How should these individuals be managed? How should they be developed in terms of social skills?
First off, let's take the bias away. Let's take the negative connotations away and just see them as talents, right? I think I honestly do say, and I still said it at the forum this Saturday, for other generations, I think for want of other words, we are masking our ignorance of this set of people, and it shows in the way we talk about them, right? And all that honestly needs to stop. What I think we should do, though, and I'll just use Andy as an example, the weekly touch-ins, the meetup at the bar, the difference and the variety with which they are managed is something that we should continue to encourage. And like I mentioned earlier, the mentorship programs that we brought in, and just that constant evolution or freedom to move things around and to be very flexible and to accept that, like I tell people, I mean, global population crossed 8 billion sometimes last year, and record has it that a major chunk of that are young people, right, that belong to the Gen Z and the millennial generation. So if your current organization and the talents you want to hire from the outside are essentially Gen Zs and millennials, shouldn't we be the ones adjusting our approach to them as against just placing this big label on them and then not wanting them in the workplace? In our experience, it's been great working with line managers and senior executives to just change their views about how we see them. They may not dress like you dress. Don't catch them, right? Just be a bit more open and understanding and teach them. And then from a learning standpoint, this is where our curriculum should now have things on working with others, managing your boss, how to behave in meetings, emotional intelligence, all the sort of things, are things we need to plan around, as it were. That's my advice. But the big one is let's take the bias away.
Yeah, thank you. Kacie, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, what a great comment, Gbenga. Seriously, we talked about multicultural training and awareness. I certainly think we need multi-generational training and awareness as well, since there are still many baby boomers as well as Xers, Y, millennials, Gen Z, and I'm sure there's another generation behind Gen Z that I'm not aware of what our label is for that quite yet. But I agree with you. I think, focusing on skills again, I think companies should, and someone alluded to looking at future skills of their organization. And I think that's where we need to define, what does it take to be successful in this organization? Do we need people who are really good at problem solving? I love emotional intelligence. I would teach that all day long to everybody who enters the workplace because I think it's so important. But identifying what those skills are and then providing those development opportunities to people as they enter the workplace is certainly something that we should be considering. And I agree about being flexible, empathetic, understanding. I have a daughter who graduated high school during COVID, and that was terrible. Her first year of college was spent in her dorm room. And so some of these environmental things have happened to people completely out of their control. And so we do need to have empathy and understanding around that. But then, again, back to the manager's job and all of our jobs is to help people be successful, right? We want to build them up. We don't want to tear them down, which is why feedback and development is so important for this newer generation coming into the workplace. I feel very, very strongly about that. So Gbenga, I appreciate your comments greatly on that.
Thank you, Gbenga and Kacie. It's all about compassion, and that is a wonderful thing. Andy, as we are moving towards incorporating more technologies in our recruitment processes, unavoidable, I think, how do we minimize algorithmic biases and discrimination? This is the future world of work. We can. It's a reality.
That's a tough one.
That's a tough one, right? Because I think we must accept first that behind every technology is a human input, So I know we have these conversations in the little bubbles, but the reality is that you still have humans who are building the AI, who are engineering the background, right? What screening needs to look like, what are the different touch points, and I think where we need to kind of take a step back on is really, I think, readdress, I think, some of these things from a human perspective, right? And a lot of that is going to come from, and Kacie alluded to it earlier, and in fact, I think all of us around, training around, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, understanding, multi-generational workplaces, understanding multicultural practices. Because in the construct of life, the workplace is the one place where we're all expected to act a certain way, right? There's certain behaviors that we are forced to assimilate into, and a lot of those behaviors are actually outside of our natural affinity to be certain individuals. And that's why you'll hear people who meet their colleagues at a party elsewhere. They're like, "God, Sean was so different. Like, I didn't know this guy was like this." And so I think there's so much more work, particularly coming off of the pandemic, that needs to be done from a human perspective. I often say, and I think, Brigitte, you've heard me say this on multiple platforms, that, COVID gave humanity back to humanity. But I think whilst technology is a great accelerant of a lot of things, behind these wonderful technologies is human input. So those human biases don't completely go away. I don't think I have the answer. I mean, I think even as someone who works at a technology company, I'm constantly challenging my engineers just in terms of their biases. A lot of the work we do is around social impact, and and our perceptions of what the lower income earners are experiencing in the workplace, and how that then shows up in the platform that we're developing. And I'm constantly pushing back. And in part of that work, I'm also recognizing that, we all are doing our best from the lens of our own experience. And so the input and the data that we put into these machine learning and AIs and all these platforms is also reflective of the human that does the coding behind it. And so I can't say I've got an answer for that, but I do think there's so much opportunity now more than ever to, as caution, I think, development teams, and I think to take them on the journey. So I think whilst they're great technical experts and they're building amazing things, we've got to be so careful around that, because it is their biases that goes into the code. And I don't know how do we circumvent around that. I don't know how do we sense check, and engineers' biases. And so, yeah, I actually don't have the answer. I mean, I'm currently in that position with my own team, and I love them to death, and they're amazing engineers. But I'm conscious of the biases that come into building what we're building, and we constantly are sense checking, their understanding, their perceptions of the world, and how that then informs the platform that we build, that is for the consumers on the other end who don't come from the same place of their privilege.
Okay, thanks for that. I do know some parts of the US, I think it's New York State or New York City, where they are asking people to actually conduct regular audits, and they're looking at legislation actually to force people to conduct regular audits. So Gbenga's going to leave us very, very soon. I've got a question that has come through. So Gbenga, if you disappear in about 5 minutes time, or we'll say cheers to you. But let me ask this question, and it is from Alden. Alden and Bosta, I hope I've got your name right. The question is, what tactics can firms use to build a culture of continual learning and development? And would you recommend any strategies for developing cross-cultural competence amongst employees? Do you want to comment, Kacie, on building a culture of continual learning and development? And then you were touching on the cross-cultural stuff earlier, so maybe you want to respond to that part of the question. Thanks.
Yeah, culture of learning and development that's a big a big ask. I of course would be asking all sorts of questions as to why would you want to move your culture in that direction? Where is your culture today? Where are the gaps? But really about learning and development, I think very tactically, I guess I would approach that question to say, learning happens every day on the job. It's not always within a learning event that your HR department might put on or a different department might put on. But I think to truly be a culture of learning, there's several things you need to embrace. One, we were talking about it, and that is focusing on skills and strengths. So to really position people to maximize those strengths, get them to teach back others if they, maybe they become a mentor or a teacher themselves. But I think constant sharing, I think understanding that mistakes will happen and we might fail at something, but instead of focusing on that negative, can we really put into place that we are going to do something like after action reviews, if you will, after every project to really learn the lessons that we can carry forward. I think sometimes we focus so much on learning events, which again, I'm a learning professional, so I'm all about that, but there are so many other facets to being a learning culture. So trust, safety, taking risks, celebrating successes, yes, but learning from the things that didn't go well and really baking that into your processes. Again, managers have a role to play to helping people learn and develop on the job. I think it has to become part of the fabric of who you are. And it can be formal, but also informal learning, as I just mentioned, just through, the course of work and understanding what works and what doesn't, and how do we take the lessons and make it better and try new things. To me, that is very much a culture of learning, and leadership sponsorship has to, really lead that and make it okay to do those things and provide time and space to do those things.
Thanks, Kacie.
Sure.
Before you go, can you comment on the part of the question where they are asking about any strategies for developing cross-cultural competence amongst employees? And also, Gbenga, since you're about to leave, if you can just give us your final thoughts after you answer the question as well.
For me, this has been good. This has been good. We should do this often, please. We should do this often. Because again, as professionals in this space, we can get caught up in many things that we're doing, and just that ability to hear, thoughts from across the aisle can really just be very helpful. One, to validate that you're on track, and two, to just hear something new, right? So we should do this often. That's one. Two is during COVID and afterwards, modular learning has come to stay. Just learning in small bits and in modules has come to stay. And for us, from experience, even speaking with friends in other markets, this whole idea of doing either departmental or organizational learning sharing sessions, like we like to call KSS, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 1 hour, it's a topic. People are asked to make presentations around products, policies, and just what's happening in the market. And it can happen every week or every other week, virtually or, hybrid mode and all of that. It's such a great opportunity. First off, people are forced to research. Two, they make presentations, so they grow in confidence, manage emotions, and generally just get comfortable talking to each other. And then if your organization work across borders and multiple teams, at least they get to see faces of employees a bit more regularly, stuff like that. And it's something we've done. It works. I've seen it work in different organizations. And just that ability to, in fact, if you can, make two departments debate a topic, right? If there's a process flaw where the output of a department is the input of another one, just give them the same topic, particularly audits and people in sales. Just ask them to come debate turnaround time for payment to vendors, for instance, and you'll be amazed how much, how divergent their views might be, and then everybody can learn, right? I've seen that work, and that's what I would recommend. In terms of last thoughts, to all HR professionals on this call, please kudos, I celebrate the work you're doing. You probably don't have power in your country, internet is shaky, or your own compensation is not where it should be. One of my good friends said it recently that what we do for the living is more important than what we do for a living. I'll take that again. What we do for the living is much more important than what we do for a living. For every one of us, if you hire staff, provide work, that's impact for generations to come. If you help line managers be better and they get promoted, that's just look at the impact on the societal impact of what we do as people managers. I like someone, perhaps you're trying to pull your hair right now. Just have that at the back of your mind. All the best. And please, let's continue the conversation on LinkedIn. I'll be glad. That's it from me. I'm sorry I have to go.
Thanks, Gbenga. It's been great serving on a panel with you and getting to know such interesting case studies from your organization and from Nigeria. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
And I'm sure we'll have contact in the future. Do come to our conference in November. It would be great.
I'm going to take you off on that. I'll be glad to. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Kacie for your final thoughts before we leave the session.
Yes. Final thoughts. Well, this has been a great conversation. I think it's a very exciting time, actually, despite I know we've got lots of challenges, but it is a very exciting time to be in HR talent management space. Things are moving rapidly. I actually see a lot of us having more license to be creative in our solutions because we have, real problems to solve in terms of attracting and retaining and growing talent within our organizations. And I think, I worry a little bit about generative AI as a writer, I have to say, because I don't want to be replaced by that tool. But I do think our focus on many of the things we've talked about with skills and experiences, but really, I think human skills become more important today as we develop more and more smart technology, but also the skills about how do humans and AI interact. And I think that from a learning professional, that is where I am putting a lot of my focus is to figure out, what do our roles become and how can we interact, because we won't be replaced. Certain tasks may be replaced, but people will not be replaced. And so how do we work together and maximize those tools? I think it's very exciting. I think generative AI is fascinating and almost as big as the internet, in my opinion. So it'll be very interesting to see where that goes, but I think we're in a very exciting time to really innovate and create.
Great, that's awesome. Andy, what are your final thoughts?
Final thoughts is I think we're really at an exciting time as a profession. I want to commend all of us who have walked the path with other employees this last 2-3 years, supporting others. And just a gentle reminder to all of us, please don't forget to take care of yourself. It's that same rule in, on an aircraft. Put on your own mask before you put on the mask of others. The studies and the data that keeps coming out is increasingly worrying that HR professionals are really burnt out. I really think we have a massive opportunity, I think, for us to rethink the world of work, to, I think, carve out things that are exciting for the future and the future generations to come. Let's embrace it. Let's embrace how we, collaborate and co-create with technology. Technology is never, ever going to replace us. I think human contextualization and I think our cognitive ability is always going to be necessary as part of the human experience in the workplace. And that's something we should never, ever forget. But Brigitte, thank you to you for, I think, guiding the conversation and facilitating today's session.
Thank you so much. From my side, it's been fascinating engaging with my panelists. So thank you so much for participating. Thank you, GSDC and Sotolo and team, for organizing this conversation, this international conversation where we can just share across continents, across the world. It's absolutely awesome. Thank you for all the people who joined to listen in to this conversation. I see the future for HR as being exceptionally bright, and I'm very, very excited to be part of the HR community. I'll hand over to you, Sotolo, just to close us out. Thank you so much, everybody.